Hey lonely people, it's me and Buster Green. I'm a guy who discusses anime, and today we're going to discuss one of the all-time classics. Now before we get down to business though, I'm trying so hard to get my channel monetized. It's a real pain in the ass, and as of right now, I need to get 899 watch hours. Ugh, YouTube Power, they fucked me. Anyway, please try to watch my content for at least an hour today if you can. If 899 people can watch my stuff for 1 hour today, I will be monetized tomorrow. Anyway, it's been like a year since I last did one of these videos, but my second most popular one is where I talked about the best episode of Studio Bones' ill-fated PSN exclusive anime, Zammed: The Lost Memories. So hot after that, a year later, I figure I'll cover another classic Bones anime. And maybe I'll cover the most classic Bones anime. In my opinion, this anime gets a bad rap for no reason, so hang on to your butts, because we're heading down to Tokyo Jupiter to talk about 2001's RahXephon. Now, RahXephon is the brainchild of long-term Gundam mecha and costume designer Yutaka Izubuchi. And to this day, it's one of the best and only anime that he's personally made. Despite being a mecha/costume designer on dozens of other anime, this is one of the only time he went out of his way to make his own anime, which is a real shame because Izubuchi has been like really helpful on like a lot of classic Gundam series. Like all the classic Gundam series from like the 80s and the 90s, he worked on them all. I originally wrote a super massive introduction to this show, like introducing him, introducing the show, but that ended up being so heavy that I spun that off into another video. Anyway, when that video is done, it will be right here, and you should watch that video too, or watch it after this one. Anyway, to boil it all down, RahXephon is a conceptual remake of the 1970s giant robot show Brave Riding, with the conceptual X factor that made Neon Genesis Evangelion a hit in the 1990s. It was worked on by a lot of the same staff as the Evangelion crew, and it's also an anime literally about what is sound, what is music, what is reality, and what are you? RahXephon gives you this world of war of aliens, but the world it gives you is very normal, and it also starts to look more and more horrible and distorted the longer you look at it. Ironically, the main characters of the show just want to be happy and comfortable and love each other, but they can't because aliens are killing everybody. Now, RahXephon was Studio Bones' first original anime after they splintered off from Sunrise following a bad falling out over the Cowboy Bebop movie. And RahXephon is essentially the anime that made Studio Bones what it is today. If RahXephon hadn't been a hit, Studio Bones probably would have collapsed and they'd probably have gone back to Sunrise with their tail between their legs. And some other studio would be animating My Hero Academia nowadays. But thankfully it was a hit. Anyway, so RahXephon is a series about a protagonist named Ayato Kamina, who lives in a version of Tokyo where he's been told Tokyo is the last city on Earth. But one day, a mysterious older woman with a headband shows up and convinces him to leave Tokyo, where he discovers that Tokyo is actually stuck inside a massive, surreal, domed object called the Tokyo Jupiter that just happens to look like Jupiter for no particular reason. It was placed there by aliens called the Mulians, who may or may not be from the continent of Mu, and the Tokyo Jupiter has caused this weird time dilation effect, where the rest of the world is 12 years more advanced than Tokyo, who is still stuck in the 1990s. Ayato then becomes the pilot of the giant stone statue RahXephon and goes on a horrible journey to kill a bunch of people, try to stop the Mu aliens, try to free Tokyo, and along the way he has to deal with his teen angst and the problem that all boys have: they need to have sex. Fun fact, the letter X in RahXephon is actually the same letter X from the word sex. Now, like Evangelion, where the main protagonist has his options of a clone of his dead mom, who's kind of a ghostly lady, an angry European girl who hates him, or an older woman he logistically should not have a chance with, RahXephon gives Ayato a slew of female options, including Reika Mishima, a mysterious ghost woman who might be imaginary, Haruka Shito, an older woman who is super into him for some creepy reason, the older woman's less interested but more age-appropriate younger sister, and lastly, Hiroko Asahina, the stereotypical anime childhood best friend of short hair, who conveniently only likes the protagonist because she knew him as a child, and dating him would be super convenient because they live next to each other. Now, Hiroko ends up being a huge factor for this episode we're going to discuss today, so we'll get back to her. Now, unlike Evangelion, where Shinji had unclear sexual tension that ebbed and flowed throughout the show with all these potential love interests, Ayato is more clearly looking for a romantic partner throughout the series. It's one of his big things that he's a lonely, stressed out guy, and he's trying to find somebody to love. The conflict of the show, apart from the aliens, is that it's just unclear for him which woman he should get with, which woman would suit him best, which woman would give him the best life. And then there's the whole, is Reika imaginary or not, which is confusing the shit out of him, because he kind of wants to get with her the most, except she might be imaginary. So that's a big deal breaker. You know, you can't just get with your imaginary girlfriend. Also, I'm going to let you guys know that Razafan was adapted into both a manga and a movie after the anime had aired. And both of these adaptations are really timey-wimey, to say the least. They really fuck with the continuity. They really fuck with the identity of certain characters. So for today, I'm just going to say you guys should watch the anime. The movie's alright, but if you want to watch the movie, don't watch the movie until you've seen the whole anime and you've waited like a year and you've forgotten most of the details. And the manga, I can't even recommend the manga because it's just completely different from the show. It's basically just like a complete reimagining. Now, with that being said, the whole reason I'm doing another episode of Best Episode Ever is that it's been like a year and I just haven't been able to think of like a show that really like moved me the way Razafan has. There's just not that many series that like kind of like land on like one perfect episode, but Razafan does. Like another problem is like a lot of series have like a bunch of good episodes, and don't get me wrong, Razafan does have a lot of good episodes, but this one stands apart from all those and just is like so much stronger than all those. Razafan's different. Like, maybe I just personally am attached to it because I did watch it when I was in high school and I personally was dealing with a lot of sexual angst. But there's only one episode of Razafan that can be considered the absolute craziest, the absolute saddest, and the absolute best episode when I think back on the series. There is only one best episode of Razafan, one episode that I still remember 20 years later because it gives me nightmares when I can't sleep at night. The best episode of Razafan is Razafan episode 19, Blue Friend, Ticket to Nowhere. Originally aired June 26, 2002. By the way, Razafan has just been recently released by Sentai Filmworks on Blu-ray. I'm completely going to pick that up when I can because I have such fond memories of the show. And also them relicensing it nuked all the illegal YouTube copies of the show that I used to watch when I was bored. So yeah, Razafan starts off with a banger track called Hemisphere, where you see Ayato naked in like a pool of blood and like Tokyo Jupiter's behind him, and you got some Salvador Dali melting clocks to subtly imply the time dilation concept. And then you see the Razafan flying around, blowing up monsters while all these women moan orgasmically in the background. It's so like subconsciously subtle, but it's a solid opening. Alright, so episode 19 starts with the Vermilion, an anti-Dolem government official robot floating around Tokyo Jupiter trying to find Ayato. Because in the episode before this, Ayato went into Tokyo Jupiter to rescue Asahina, and now they just left Tokyo Jupiter together. So Haruka asks her sister where the Razafan left, and did it get lost or something? Was it still in Tokyo Jupiter? Actually, as it turns out, because a major contention of the plot in this show is like where Ayato's loyalties lie, because he's the only one who can pilot the Razafan, and the Razafan is like critical to like ending the war. Like the ongoing theme of the show is like where Ayato's loyalty lies. Like, is he going to be loyal to Japan, or is he going to be loyal to Tokyo? Is he going to be loyal to his girlfriend or his mother? Is he going to be loyal to the human race or the Mulians? There's a lot of back and forth where the show plays with the duality of what Ayato's going to do, because he seems to always have like only two choices to make, but whatever choice he makes will like end the human race. So what's interesting about this episode is Ayato went back to Tokyo Jupiter to rescue his childhood girlfriend Hiroko. And it still seems that she loves him so much. So at this point, it seems that he's settled his love quest. He's going to settle down with Hiroko. And this satisfies him, because one of Ayato's big thing is that he's been like mulling over like which girl he's going to end up with. And since he couldn't make up his mind, it's just been like fucking him up. So in this episode, he picks Hiroko, and he at this point decides to be just completely selfish. And he's just going to cut everyone out of his life except for Hiroko. So he and Hiroko run away together. He hides the Rasvan in a lake, and the two of them run off to a train station. Now, this is Hiroko's first time outside of Tokyo, so she's having complete culture shock because she's been living inside this fake reality, and now she's finally outside of the fake reality. And once again, the somber piano music of veteran piano player Ichiko Hashimoto just completely carries the show. So Hiroko is freaked out when she realizes all the weird things that have happened, that giant robots exist, that there was a 12-year time gap inside and outside the Tokyo Jupiter. And she doesn't really understand it because she's not the smartest chick you've ever met. Additionally, since she's completely abandoned her old life, she's getting super existential about her sense of identity. On top of that, considering that she's abandoned her old life, she conveys that by abandoning that life, she's abandoning her old self. And if she has abandoned herself, then who is she? If your life was you go to school, you live here, and you work, take that all away. Who are you now? So anyway, they go to a rest stop and they look at a city and she kind of freaks out. Then Ayato takes them to a pawn shop. They sell their watches so they can get some money to run away with. And since their watches are old, they get about $500 for them. Now, it looks like from the background design that they're southwest of Tokyo around Fuji City. But according to the map here, they're at Higashi Nogone, which is barely outside of Tokyo. That honestly seems like a mistake. That seems like that should be inside Tokyo Jupiter. I really thought they were way farther than that just based on how big Tokyo Jupiter is. Anyway, so they buy some train tickets and they plan on going to Kagoshima. Then I think they take the bus instead of the train. But yeah, anyway, Kagoshima is one of the most southern cities in Japan. So they're actually going on this massive journey sprawling the entirety of West Japan. But because it's an anime, it seems like they really just don't go that far. But yeah, it's a massive journey. Now, Hiroko figures that since they're going on this massive journey, Ayato must be running away from someone. And he kind of is. Just being real, he's running away from the entire plot of this anime, but he's also running away from, all the other women he, didn't decide to end up with. So they're on this long-distance bus ride because the bus is cheaper than the train, and Hiroko still is, fully having an existential crisis. She's wondering about her life. She's wondering about her family. She's wondering about what will happen to them since she abandoned them. And she's also wondering about what her relationship with Ayato truly is now, because it's just them now. He is protecting her, and she's massively confused, but that's all she has now. So they sleep in a movie theater because they have nowhere to sleep and they don't want to get a hotel. And then Hiroko has a nightmare where she communicates with a Mulian that has invaded her body. Now, Hiroko was not a Mulian before. This Mulian just, I think, is literally just now invading her body. And I'm also not sure why it's happening. I'm not sure if it's happening because she was in Tokyo Jupiter and she left. I'm not sure if it's happening because the Mulians are fucking with Ayato. I'm not sure if this was her destiny. I'm not sure if she always was a Mulian. I think the show strongly implies that she wasn't a Mulian before. But yeah, this is a major contention point of the episode because as she wakes up, the movie theater reminds them that the Mulians are dangerous fucking aliens that need to be killed on spot. And they have blue blood, so you can identify them in a crowd. And that's terrifying because her identity is falling apart, and she's also being invaded by this fucking alien that's literally inside her body. Meanwhile, there's a B plot with this detective tracking them down. The detective gets to the pawn shop and he gets their watches. He confiscates the watches as evidence, and he threatens the pawn shop man for aiding the aliens, and the pawn shop man is fucked out of his money. Now, at this point, the detective tracks down Ayato's path super easily because Ayato, barely covered his steps. He acted like a kid in this whole mess. Also, the detective tries to get Ayato's bus tickets canceled, but that doesn't work because Ayato already reached his destination. Now, they realize by messing around with the bus tickets that Ayato's on his way to Kagoshima. And interestingly, it turns out at this point that the detective is not working for Terra, the nerve-like organization that, protects the world. I think he's working with Dr. Ichiki, the scientist. Anyway, so Ayato and Hiroko, meanwhile, have started living in this hotel room together. And there's this super mild sexual tension that now, a man and a woman are living together. But hey, at least they made it all the way to Kagoshima. So at this point, Asahina brushes her teeth because she hasn't done it in a few days. And when she brushes her teeth, blue blood comes out of it, which is an extremely nasty visual. Then she also sees her evil Mulian self in the mirror, and it's like a jump scare. After this, they start to walk around Kagoshima, and Asahina really tries to confess something to Ayato. It seems that she's torn between either telling him that she loves him or asking him for help with the Mulian thing. And there's some super clever editing around the moment where they bounce around the fact that she has a problem, and they completely convey that just with the editing. It really makes you feel that Ayato should help her, but he's not going to because he doesn't know anything is wrong. Ultimately, she says nothing about what her problem is, and they just go eat a sandwich. Meanwhile, Ayato has gotten some bare minimum basic job, I guess, down by the docks, so the two of them can live a life together. And then Ayato brings up her family again, and Asahina suddenly realizes that she has completely forgot about her family. She questions who she is, and she questions if she's even still a human. And the fact that she is forgetting all these things is making her more reliant and more subservient to Ayato. And she's happy with him, but she also hates her life because she's losing her identity. She's losing everything that made her herself, and the only thing she has left is Ayato. And she's happy with Ayato. She's happy having someone to watch TV with. She's happy enjoying the mundane moments of her life. And since Ayato is now the only person in her life that she even knows, she wants to keep him happy. And once again, this super interesting domestic situation is playing out. Now, meanwhile, as this is playing out, the detective finally gets down to Kagoshima. He's a step behind them. And the two of them are sitting on a bench watching the boat go by. And Asahina asks Ayato about the boat, and he says the boat's probably going to Africa, and she just says it's funny to think about the whole world being back since she's been in Tokyo Jupiter, where they've been telling her the rest of the world was destroyed. Now, later on, as the night continues, Asahina's mental state continues to decline. And on another night when they're living alone in the hotel, Ayato opens up to her, and they share that they both had this confusion of their own identities since they both escaped from Tokyo Jupiter. They both have to live in this slightly altered world. Then Ayato has this additional identity confusion since his parents weren't his real parents. And they're just in this really crazy situation where their lives have both completely fallen apart by the situation in the anime, but at the same time they're in the same situation and they can really only relate to each other. And suddenly, just when things are going good, the Razafan wakes up and flies down to Kagoshima. Now, at this point, seeing that Ayato has opened up to her, Asahina decides that she's fully in love with Ayato and she's going to give herself to him. She's finally ready to have sex with him, and he's interested in having sex with her, but before he can reciprocate her feelings, this Dolo monster arrives in Kagoshima. And the Razvan shows up on auto mode and instantly starts fighting it. Now, Ayato has this super grim realization that he just cannot escape the plot of this anime. He has to play it out, he has to beat the monsters, and no matter where he goes, ultimately he's going to end up in the middle of a battle between the Razvan and some stupid-ass monsters. Now, he actually decides that before he wanted to run away from his problems because he just wanted to have a life, but now he's found that life. He's settled down here romantically with Asahina, and he's found the comfort in her that he's been looking for the entire series. And having found what he needed from her, that changes his mind about fighting, and so he decides that he's going to protect her, and he's going to protect the human race, and he's going to be a better super robot pilot. And she thinks that's so great because she loves him, and her mind is falling apart. And he floats up to the Razvan like a fucking angel, and Asahina just wants to say one more thing to him before he leaves, but she doesn't because she's bad at communicating, and even if she wasn't, her brain is falling apart right now. So she tells him that she's going to wait for him forever, and in a really grim way, she will. Now at this point, Ayato fuses into the Razafan and he fights another Dolem. While at the same time, Asahina is struggling to keep her brain intact. Now, finally, the Dolom and the Mulian ghost inside it, they fuse with her. And she struggles with the last of her free will and the last of her soul to confess her feelings to Ayato as the Dolom is trying to overwrite her. Now, at the same time this is happening, Ayato is a few feet away in his robot trying to kill the Dolom. But because the Dolom and Asahina's lives are missing together, the Dolom is basically her. And on top of that, the Dolom is trying to do the same thing she's trying to do, which is transmitting her final dying messages to him. Now, Ayato doesn't know the monster he's fighting is his girlfriend. He thinks he's trying to protect his girlfriend from this monster. So he fills with this epic rage, anger, anime power, and he just starts killing the fucking Dolom. Now, the Dolom he's fighting in this episode is actually not even a strong Dolom. It's not even threatening. But because it is linked to his girlfriend, as he's killing the Dolom, he's killing her. And the way it's juxtaposed, it's fucking horrible. You see these like horrible scenes of like the Razafan punching the Dolom and like blood gushing out of Asahina. And Asahina is literally just falling apart as the Razafan rips the Dolom to shreds. And so as she dies, she lives behind one final message. Her dying message is that she loves Ayato and goodbye. And he sees the goodbye and she's dead. The Dolom explodes. And then after that, Kagoshima goes back to normal. The threat is eliminated. And Ayato walks into the hotel room and finds Mishima dead in a pool of her own blood. Now at this point there's a scene skip, so we don't really get the full reaction, but hours later when the detective finally catches up to Ayato, he's still in there crying and reading Asahina's diary with her final message. The detective tries to collect Ayato, but he also gives him back Asahina's watch, which causes him to break down crying again. And at the end of this episode, Ayato is suddenly captured by the science squad, and the Razafan stays grimly parked outside the hotel. So, that unfortunately is the best episode of Razafan. It's the most haunting episode of Razafan. It's a series that definitely had a lot of haunting moments all throughout, but nothing just hits as hard as this episode. Now, don't get me wrong, you guys should really watch the whole series. The whole series is fascinating in its own right. It's a massive explanation of like what is music, what is the human self, who are we as people. They set up a lot, and I think every episode of Razafan is pretty fascinating. But this episode, I think, like really zeroes in on like what it was all about, because the primary conflict in Razafan is that Ayato is this realistic protagonist who doesn't want to fight. He just wants to be happy. He wants a normal life, and he wants to be with a woman who loves him. And unfortunately, all that is fucked up by the numerous problems in Ayato's world and his fundamental indecision to choose a woman that he can settle down with, which is something I think we can all relate to. Now, in this episode, he's just decided, fuck it, it can work with Asahina. The world can go to shit, and he rejects his role as the main super robot pilot. You know, it's the old, I'm not Spider-Man anymore. And it's beautiful, but it's ultimately a futile romantic gesture, because this episode kind of brings it back to Destiny. It brings it back to, like, where the characters are as people. And yeah, you can speculate that it could have gone different in a lot of different ways, because this episode really plays up a lot of classic mecha tropes from like the 70s and the 80s. And I love that even though it's resorting to doing those tropes, it's doing a way more smart, way more realistic version of those tropes. Like we have the old woman in danger trope, the old like run away with me and be a happy together trope. But it's interesting to see the protagonist actually play it out, and it's interesting to see it fail. We also get shades of a lot of old Gundam tropes, like the mentally damaged girlfriend. Now, previously this had been established with for Murasame and Zeta Gundam, but the interesting twist here is that when Ayato falls in love with Hiroko, she's not mentally damaged. And she's not mentally damaged at the start of the episode. It's just that over the course of this episode, her mental state just declines because, I don't know, like she was kind of out of sorts at first from the reality being fake and like the realization with that. But what's interesting here is that the whole episode deals with like the sort of mental erasure that Hiroko is going throughout the episode. It's almost treated like a kind of brain sickness, and the reality is her brain is basically being deleted by the Mulian that's invading her body. On top of that, she's also got culture shock from leaving Tokyo, and there's so many other stress factors here. She's fundamentally trying to hold on to her identity, but as it slowly slips away and as she slowly forgets what that even is, the most heartbreaking thing about that is that she rationalizes in the end that she is ultimately at her core Ayato's girlfriend. That's fundamentally the core of our identity when everything else has fallen apart. And that's still her reality even as she dies. That's what she sticks with to the very end. And it's funny to see this go so wrong on so many levels. Like if Hiroko hadn't been co-opted by the Mulian, she wouldn't have fallen apart like this, and maybe eventually her and Ayato could have had a happy ending. But the thing is that because her brain is falling apart, her relationship with Ayato kind of fast forwards itself. I think that because her mental state is weakened, there's like a lot less reluctance and a lot more reliance that kind of again plays into the time dilation theme of the show. Evangelion focused on the self, the relationship, and the family, and how those elements all fell apart in the 90s. Razafan also focuses on them too, and also covers some other topics. But this episode is definitely on the nature of relationships between men and women, and for that matter, I think it really just kind of explores that combined with isolation, which is another theme of the show. In this episode, Ayato and Asahina are isolated in Kagoshima for most of the episode. It's just, again, to focus on that isolation theme, because one of the main themes of the show is that Tokyo Jupiter isolated Tokyo, and then they play with this concept of what happens when something is missing for too long. Like, what is Japan without Tokyo? What is Tokyo without Japan? What happens when these people get trapped in one place for too long? And what happens when the distractions from their lives are removed? I think Izabuchi is also trying to show kind of an allegory here for modern relationships in Japan. There's a prevailing theory in Japan these days that the main reason that men and women just don't fall in love with each other anymore is that there's too many distractions. People are too distracted by other things. And there is kind of a logic to that, because the converse of that is the old saying that if you leave a man and a woman locked in a room long enough, they'll have a baby. And yeah, people nowadays have so much to be distracted about, like cell phones, Reddit, I don't know, Battletoads. Start playing Battletoads, forget it, you're gonna die in a room. Anyway, so we also have the death of the secondary love interest in this episode. That's another mecha trope dating back to the original Gundam. And like Gundam, the protagonist indirectly murders his lover by mistake. Well, Gundam has typically done this in a fairly fast and classy way where it's accidental. Razafan does it here, and it's still accidental here, but the way they do it, where he beats her to death as she struggles to tell him he loves her, it's so fucking gruesome. The violence is utterly disgusting. I really wonder that since she died on I Love You, if she had told him that sooner, or they had hooked up sooner, would it have changed anything? I don't know. I mean, honestly, she died that way because it's dramatic as fuck, but the horror of that scene still lingers with me. Another big regret of this episode is it also kind of plays up the theme of the lack of communication in modern Japanese society. Hiroko's dying wish was that she and Ayato had just talked more, because that's ultimately the only thing she had to be happy about in her final days. And additionally, on top of that, the fact she didn't talk to him enough and the fact she wasn't honest with him kind of led directly to her death. Anyway, yeah, this is the best episode of the show. It's a super feel-bad episode, and I guess that's kind of why it stuck with me over the years, but it really expresses a lot in 20 minutes. I can talk more about this episode than the episode itself, is long. Izabuchi hasn't made another show since Razafan, and that's honestly a huge shame, because I kind of wish he had. This episode is also lightly skimmed over in the Razafan movie, but the movie changes so many details in the show, and it basically just fast forwards over it in a super unsatisfying way that the only way it's satisfying is if you remember this episode and it's just oh hey, remember this? This sucked. Anyway, despite that though, Razafan is an excellent show, and I fully recommend you guys check it out. If you want a good show that's a great follow-up after you've watched Neon Genesis Evangelion, or you just want a show that really deals with like human relationships and music, this is probably one of the best animes ever made, and I can't recommend it enough. It's also got one of the best soundtracks ever, which is another part of its lingering power, because I mean, it's ultimately just got a lot of haunting piano medleys, which really, really work. All right, that was me and Buster Green, and I was once a teenager, but now I'm not. Good night.